Taito Milestones 2! Now, some of you might have watched my review for the first game in the series and might be wondering why I even bothered to pick this up, since I really didn't like the previous title. I thought most of the games in the previous collection were okay at best and boring at worst. I was hoping that they would pick some better games this time around. And playing this, I do think they picked better. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some awful games in here, mostly the fighting ones. However, this time around, they didn't just pick fun games to play, but they actually picked ones that had maybe an interesting gimmick, and that was intriguing to me. Now, there are 3 Japan-only exclusive games, so there were 3 titles in here you might not have seen before, which is cool. That's about as kind as I'm going to be to these games, as most of them were terrible, but we'll get to it. All these titles were at one time in the arcade, so if you want to know why there are weird angles to the visuals, you have to picture these on CRT TVs back in the 80s and 90s. Now, the games on here, I actually had to look it up, because some of them were not translated. I'm sure I'm going to butcher some of the translated titles, so sorry in advance. There are 10 games on here. Bleh. The Legend of Cage, Kikikagi, The New Zealand Story, Darius 2, Liquid Kids, Gun Frontier, Solitary Fighter, Metal Black, and Dino Rex. The titles on here are either a platformer, a fighter, or a shooter. There are no puzzles this time around. And like usual, I'm going to talk about these games in the order that I enjoyed them. And my favorite in this collection is The New Zealand Story. This has you playing as a chick in a zoo whose family gets kidnapped by a walrus. You maneuver through very non-zoo looking like locations in your goal to get them back. I like the varied gameplay. You could take different paths to get to their goal that you see on the map. If you wanted to avoid enemies, you could, but the terrain would be harder. Everything was so colorful and different. Best yet, there was a continue option. If you die, it leaves you right where you left off. Most of the time in arcade games, they take you back to the beginning of the stage to make it harder on you, so you'll spend more money. This was a delightful little platformer that you'll enjoy for about an hour or so. Darius 2. I don't like space shooters, but I couldn't help but be in awe of what this was. This was originally a 3-screen game. That's why it looks so weird and long. I love games that are different, and this could have just been another generic space shooter, but they put this 3-screen gimmick in it, and I loved it. While I do still suck at these types of games, the fact there were so many different ways to go in the zone select, and the gimmick of being so strange to play in but compelling, I couldn't help but enjoy playing it, for longer than I expected. Liquid Kids. This is another platformer. It is sort of the same as that previous game, The New Zealand Story. The locations do change, but I didn't find it as fun as The New Zealand Story. It's all about a platypus who could fire water out of their hands. I thought this platformer was just okay. Kikikakai. This one was sort of a shooter, but one where you have to use charms to ward off ghosts and ghouls. It didn't have a lot of lasting enjoyment, as it started to get repetitive. It has you maneuvering through this boxy world where ghosts will try to kill or hug you. Some of the ghosts just want to embrace you. I guess they just needed love. After you get far enough, you'll fight a boss and move on to the next world. It wasn't bad, just okay. Gun Frontier. It's a combat shooter, much like 1942. You destroy whatever comes in front of you and collect the bombs to blast away much more powerful enemies. You will upgrade your guns and fight all sorts of planes, tanks, and turrets. And it was fun for a few minutes, but I found it a bit repetitive. Benah. I really couldn't take this one seriously. This has you playing as a masked superhero spiritual firefighter, and it's your job to get to the bottom floor and save a baby? Or I guess it's supposed to be a girl, I can't tell. However, playing this the whole time, all I was picturing in my head was Quagmire from Family Guy. They had such a similar look and movement. I kept saying giggity giggity as he was waddling around. He sticks his tongue out if he dies, almost like he's trying to lick the player. Then if he does save the person, he decides to kiss them. Okay, let's just say this is a woman and not a baby, because a spandex firefighter shouldn't be kissing babies in burning buildings. This whole title is weird. The fire is alive, ghosts come out to grab you, which I assume are just the people who died in the rooms who you didn't get to. Overall, the whole thing felt like a bad version of elevator action. Metal Black. Here's another space shooter, only he had a very annoying gimmick. In order to power up your ships and weapons, and super weapons, you have to collect these DNA strands to slowly power up your guns and super beam. If you shoot your beam out, you're going to need to do it all over again. I found the collectathon pretty dull and kind of distracting when I'm trying to kill a bunch of enemies. However, I will say it had one of the most impressive openings. It had a whole story attached to this shooter. It went on for like 2 minutes at least. It was unnecessary, but I liked the way it was presented as it used some interesting sprite work. The Legend of Cage. Okay, now we're getting to the worst of the worst. This has you playing as a ninja who has to stop, I assume, space ninjas? Since they're all dropping from the sky. They'll just keep coming until it moves to another level. I have no idea what I did to move on. And unlike the next level, where it has indicators on the bottom to explain, as it's actually counting the kills, the first level doesn't. You're just gonna moon jump throughout the forest. It was extremely goofy. For a few minutes, I was just jumping all around because it was so dumb. Ninjas would just super jump around as well. They would throw shurikens, blow fire at you, or even try to slash swords at you in order to kill you. One hit, you're dead. Once you get past the insanity of the crazy jumping, you find out it's a pretty boring game. Solitary Fighter. The last two games in this collection, they're kind of both like Street Fighter, only way worse. Now the controls in this one were very stiff, and while you could get down some of the controls after a while, it was still boring to play. Now the names in this one were just bonkers, like Bat Blue and Lick Joe. I'd love to see the delivery room where they announce my bouncing baby boy named Lick Joe, or even Bat. This takes place in the 50s. I refuse to believe that some mom named her child Lick. Would his nickname be like Licky Joey? As you're fighting, women will actually try to kill you with a knife. I thought she was the other guy's girlfriend, but no. She'll try to stab who's ever near. What is she even doing in this? The sprites were huge, which was, I guess, nice, but everything was just so slow and clunky. And speaking of slow and clunky, Dino Rex. Holy shit, this was awful. Not only were the controls almost unwieldy, but the characters were so slow to move around. This has you fighting as a dinosaur, who for some reason takes orders from a human. This kind of feels like a precursor to Pokemon, with the way the humans are controlling the dinosaurs. I would say the dinosaurs were scared for some reason of the humans, but if you lose, your trainer will be eaten by a pterodactyl, so that's clearly not it. The only thing cool about this is that you can actually destroy some of the arenas that you're in. Other than that, this was so dull. The button presses often didn't do what I wanted, and this is the one game I was happy to only have to play a couple times. Now, all the games give you some options that you can change up if you want to make things easier on yourself or harder on yourself. Like you can increase the lives, you can decrease the difficulty, or increase it. There often wasn't a ton of options, but it was nice to see. Taito Milestones 2 was way better than the first game, but that's not a hard hurdle to jump over. The biggest issue I have with it is that there aren't any games here that you're going to want to play for a long period. It's going to be something that you play once or twice and then move on. Now, this is somehow being priced normally at $39.99, and it is definitely not worth that. Maybe when it's on a deep sale you can pick it up, or if you have a rental service you can use, you can play all the games in about 2 hours. Now the titles in this were more interesting than the first title, but none of them were compelling to replay. So if you have space on your GameFly queue, or you find it on a deep sale, then it might be worth it. Other than that, don't bother.